You ever meet someone so harmless that even bees would not sting them? And somehow, that person ends up in a war with the HOA. Yeah, that was my Grandma June. All she wanted was to grow tomatoes. That was it. Not throw parties, not raise chickens, not start a community protest, just grow a few tomatoes in her front yard. But apparently, that was too much for our beloved Homeowners Association. It all started one warm spring morning. Birds were singing, the sun was shining, and my grandma, wearing her floppy hat and bright yellow gloves, was out there humming old songs while digging up a little patch of her lawn. She wanted to make her own vegetable garden. I am too old to sit around and do nothing, she told me. I want to taste something I grew with my own hands. It sounded innocent enough. She planted a few tomato vines, some peppers, and a handful of basil. Honestly, it looked like a picture from a gardening magazine. The neighbors loved it. People walking by would compliment her. Dogs would stop to sniff the basil, and kids would wave when she offered them fresh cherry tomatoes. It was wholesome. It was peaceful, until the envelope arrived. A plain white letter from the HOA stamped with that smug logo that instantly ruins your day. Grandma thought it was the annual newsletter. Nope, it was a violation notice. Your front yard vegetable garden is in violation of community aesthetics guidelines. Please remove all non-decorative plants within 7 days to avoid fines. 7 days. When she read it, she laughed, this light, innocent laugh, and said, "Oh, they must have made a mistake. Who could be mad about tomatoes?" But a week later, another letter came. This one was printed in red ink, like they were declaring war. Final warning, non-compliance will result in penalties. That is when my blood boiled. My grandma, the kindest, gentlest woman on the planet, getting threatened over a tomato plant. No chance. So I picked up the phone and called the HOA president, a guy named Brent. You know the type. Drives a golf cart like it is a Ferrari, wears polo shirts tucked in too tight, and probably thinks the word fun violates policy. He answered in his fake customer service voice. "Hello, this is Brent from the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. How may I assist you?" I said, "Yeah, Brent, you can assist me by explaining why you are bullying my grandma over a tomato." He cleared his throat. "Sir, the community guidelines clearly state that only ornamental plants are allowed in visible areas. Vegetables are considered net," I replied. "Brent, you realize your ornamental plants die in 2 weeks, right? Tomatoes feed people." He sighed like I had asked him to solve world peace. "Sir, this is not about food. It is about aesthetics." And that was the moment I realized they picked the wrong grandma. The next morning, I went over to her house with a plan. We spent the whole weekend turning that little garden into a work of art. We added colorful flowers around the border, a cute white fence, and even a hand-painted wooden sign that said, "Welcome to Grandma's Garden." It looked magical. Even the mailman stopped to take a picture. But on Monday morning, right after her mail was delivered, guess who showed up? Brent, clipboard in hand, sunglasses. The man looked like he was auditioning for HOA, the movie. He stood there silently, scanning the garden. I could almost hear him mentally flipping through his rule book. Finally, he said, "Mrs. June, while this is charming, it still violates Section 4C of the HOA Landscaping Code." Grandma smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, honey, I baked cookies. You want one?" He blinked up. "That is not necessary, ma'am." She handed him one anyway. "They are chocolate chip, made with love. It might help you see things differently." He took the cookie. He actually ate it. And for a second, a tiny second, he almost looked human. Then he cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I will have to bring this to the board." And Grandma, in her gentle, unshakable tone, said, "You go ahead, dear, and tell your board my garden feeds 3 families on this street. Let us see what their hearts say about that." Even Brent had no comeback. He just nodded and left cookie crumbs still on his shirt. But that was not the end. Not even close. The next HOA meeting would turn Grandma's little tomato patch into a neighborhood legend. The next HOA meeting was the talk of the neighborhood. Everyone knew about Grandma's forbidden tomatoes. People whispered about it like it was a soap opera. You would hear stuff like, "Did you hear? June's tomatoes are going to the board tonight," or "I hope she wins. Those tomatoes are amazing." So, that evening, I drove Grandma to the clubhouse. She brought a Tupperware full of fresh tomatoes, peace offerings. She said with a smile. I told her it was a terrible idea, but she just winked and said, "Nobody can stay mad when they are well fed." The meeting started like every boring HOA meeting does. Brent tapping his pen. Everyone pretending to care about parking rules and recycling bins. But then, when it was time for community violations review, Brent cleared his throat and said, "Next item, front yard gardens, non-compliance resident, Mrs. June Taylor." Every head in the room turned toward Grandma. Some people looked curious, others looked sympathetic, and one woman in the back, I swear, whispered, "She's my hero." Brent began his speech like he was reciting from a legal textbook. According to the Maplewood Estates HOA bylaws, Section 4C, Article 2, all front yard plantings must be ornamental in nature, consistent with the community's aesthetic harmony. Edible vegetation is prohibited. He looked proud of himself, like he had just quoted the Constitution. Grandma smiled kindly and said, "Thank you for reading that, dear. Now, would you like a tomato?" The room laughed. Even a couple of board members smiled. Brent tried not to, but the corner of his mouth twitched. She continued, "I have lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. When I moved here, there was no HOA. There was just community. People looked out for each other, helped mow lawns, shared sugar, and nobody cared if you planted roses or tomatoes. As long as you shared the love." The room got quiet. She had that way of speaking that made everyone listen. Then she said, "I am 75 years old. I do not need much. I just want to grow something that reminds me I am still alive, something that gives me purpose and joy every morning. Those tomatoes feed not just me, but 3 other families down the street. It is not about rules. It is about kindness." I looked around the room. You could feel the shift. Even people who had come in skeptical were now nodding. One older man in the front said softly, "That is how neighborhoods used to be." Brent fidgeted with his clipboard. "Mrs. Taylor, while that is very touching, the HOA rules exist to preserve property values and aesthetic consistency." Grandma chuckled. "Property values. Brent, I have news for you. My tomatoes raise this neighborhood's happiness value by at least 50%. The room burst out laughing again. Brent tried to bring the meeting back to order, but it was clear he was losing control. Then a woman stood up from the back. "I am Carol. I live 2 houses down from June. Those tomatoes got my kids eating vegetables for the first time in years. If the HOA takes that away, I will personally start a petition." Then another voice, "Yeah, I am with Carol. This is ridiculous." And another, "Her garden makes the street look better, not worse." Within 2 minutes, half the room was on Grandma's side. It turned from a meeting into a full-on rally. Brent looked overwhelmed. He tried to regain authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, we must follow procedure." But no one was listening anymore. The board members huddled together, whispering. After a few minutes, one of them, a kind-looking older woman named Judy, raised her hand and said, "I move to propose an exception for Mrs. Taylor's garden, considering its positive community impact." Everyone clapped. Brent's face turned red. He mumbled, "We cannot just—" Judy interrupted. "We can. Section 9 of the HOA Charter allows case-by-case exemptions with a 2/3 vote." Brent froze. He had been out. HOAD. The vote was quick. 5 board members, including Brent. The results, 4 in favor, 1 against. The motion passed. Grandma's garden was officially allowed to stay. The room erupted in applause. Some people even stood up. Grandma smiled, wiping a little tear from her eye. Then she held up one of her tomatoes like it was a trophy and said, "Who wants salsa?" The meeting ended in laughter, and people swarmed around her asking for gardening tips, thanking her for standing up, and even offering to help her expand the garden next season. On the way home, I looked at Grandma and said, "You realize you just changed HOA history, right?" She grinned. "I did not change history, dear. I just reminded them what community means." But what we did not know then was that this story was not over yet. The victory was sweet, but Brent was not done. For a while, everything seemed peaceful. Grandma's garden was thriving, neighbors were happy, and even local kids started helping her water the plants after school. The whole street smelled like sunshine and basil. But of course, Brent could not stand it. The man probably had nightmares about tomato vines crawling up his rulebook. It started small. A new notice taped to Grandma's mailbox. Friendly reminder. Gardens must be maintained to HOA cleanliness standards. She rolled her eyes, showed it to me, and said, "I clean more than this whole board combined." Then, a week later, he sent an email about unapproved decorative elements. Translation: the little gnome statue next to her basil pot. It was ridiculous. At that point, Grandma did something that caught even me off guard. She called Brent directly. "Good afternoon, Brent," she said sweetly on speakerphone. "I just wanted to thank you." He sounded confused. "Thank me for what, ma'am?" "For keeping such a close eye on my garden. I never had a personal assistant before. I had to mute the phone because I was laughing too hard." Then she added, "By the way, I have started a little something called the Maplewood Gardening Club. We will be meeting right here every Saturday morning. You are welcome to join, if you can handle the smell of tomatoes. Brent mumbled something about being busy and hung up. By the next weekend, half the neighborhood was at Grandma's house. There were folding chairs, lemonade, and kids running around with watering cans. People brought seeds, shared tips, and even planted a few new flowers in her yard. It was no longer just Grandma's garden. It was everyone's garden. And guess what? The local papers showed up. A reporter had heard about the woman who stood up to the HOA with kindness and wanted to write a feature story. The headline the next morning read, "Grandma's Garden Brings Community Together." There was a big photo of Grandma smiling next to her tomato plants, holding a basket of vegetables. Right beside her, me looking awkward and proud. It was beautiful. That same day, Brent had to call an emergency board meeting. Word spread fast that he was furious, something about unauthorized publicity and reputation management. But when the board gathered, Judy, the kind board member who had supported Grandma, told him, "Brent, the story did not make us look bad. It made the neighborhood look alive. Maybe that is something you should be proud of." Brent stayed silent. For once, he did not have a rule to hide behind. A few days later, Grandma got a knock on the door. It was Brent. No clipboard this time. Just him, standing there with an awkward smile and a paper bag in his hands. He said, "Mrs. Taylor, I came to apologize. I may have been overly strict. The board and I discussed it, and we have decided to officially allow front yard gardens under the Community Green Initiative. You inspired it." Grandma smiled. "Well, that sounds wonderful, dear. What is in the bag?" He held it out. "Tomato seeds. Thought maybe I would try growing something myself." You could see the surprise on her face. Then she laughed softly and said, "Good for you, Brent. But remember, plants grow better when you talk to them kindly." He nodded. "I will. Try." When he left, Grandma looked at me and said, "You see, dear, sometimes the best revenge is kindness. It confuses people." The next few months were something special. Every house on the street started adding little gardens, not because of rules, but because of inspiration. Even Brent's yard had a small tomato patch, which Grandma liked to tease him about. One afternoon, she invited the whole neighborhood over for what she called the harvest party. Everyone brought dishes made with homegrown ingredients, salsa, salads, grilled veggies. She even gave out silly awards. Best basil aroma, most dramatic sunflower, laziest waterer which, of course, went to me. People were laughing, eating, and dancing under fairy lights strung across the fence. The same fence that once divided neighbors now had people leaning over it to chat and share recipes. I stood there watching her, my grandma surrounded by friends, holding a tomato like it was a trophy, and I thought, this is what community is supposed to feel like. Later that night, as we were cleaning up, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, dear," she said, "rules are fine, but they should never come before kindness. You can grow flowers or you can grow food, but the real beauty is in how you treat people." I nodded. "So, what is next for you, Garden Queen?" She grinned mischievously. "Pumpkins. Big ones. Let us see what the HOA says about that." I burst out laughing. "Oh, Grandma, you are going to give Brent a heart attack." She winked. "Maybe, but at least he will have fresh pumpkin pie." And just like that, the woman who once got fined for growing tomatoes ended up changing the entire neighborhood. Not by fighting, not by yelling, but simply by staying true to her roots. Because sometimes, all it takes to beat an HOA is one stubborn grandma and a handful of tomato seed.